Hello everybody. Today, very important lesson. I can solve polynomial equations by bringing everything to one side, factoring, and setting each factor equal to 0. I've got a story for you. Story is about a guy named Mr. X squared. Mr. X squared wants to party. All day, all night, whenever you see Mr. X squared, he wants to party. Before he can party, all of his friends have to come over. All of his friends have to come over. The party's at his house. Once all of his friends come over, they party. And they party with bubbles. So that's what you need to know about Mr. X squared. There's going to be a third step, but we'll get to that in a moment. So let's actually start off with number 3. Mr. A squared, same as Mr. X squared. He wants to party. Before he can party, all of his friends have to come over to his side of the equal sign. 20 is not at his house, so we bring 20 over by subtracting 20 from both sides. A squared minus 8a minus 20 equals 0. Party time! What do they do with the party? Bubbles. Oh. Parentheses look like bubbles. Factor. Once we bring everything to one side, we factor. Now we switch into factoring mode. Factor GCF dots. Is there a GCF? No, there are 3 terms, so it's a trinomial. So we need to know how to factor a trinomial. Watch the video for that if needed. First sign comes down, negative and a negative is a positive. What multiplies to 20? 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5, and subtracts to 8. 10 and 2, bigger number comes first. And now your final step is to set each factor equal to 0. I set a minus 10 equal to 0. I set a plus 2 equal to 0. I solve each of them. I get a is 10. I get a is negative 2. So the actual steps for solving polynomial equations. To solve polynomial equations, bring everything to one side, factor, set each factor equal to 0. And that factoring step, this encompasses everything we did before. GCF, dots, trinomial, tricky trinomial, grouping, it could be any of those. So let's take a look at another example. Let's take a look at number 2. Mr. X squared, he wants to party. Can he party right now? Yes. Party time. Factor. What's the first thing we look for when we're factoring? A GCF. Is there a GCF? Yes. GCF has one set of parentheses. The GCF goes outside. I divide to determine what goes inside. Now, when I set each factor equal to 0, the factors are x and x plus 4. So I'm setting x equal to 0 and x plus 4 equal to 0. This one is done. This one I subtract 4, I get x equals negative 4. Whenever you have a variable GCF, it's going to always produce an answer of 0. Number 4, Mr. X squared, he wants to party. Before he can party, all of his friends have to come over. So I'm going to subtract 48 from both sides. Party time, bubbles, factoring. Factor GCF dots. There's an integer GCF. 3 is my GCF. So there's something special about this. Let's add into the notes here. When you have an integer GCF, divide it away and it's gone. You don't have to keep it outside like we did in the last problem, the variable GCF. If you have an integer GCF, not a variable but a number, we can divide everything by 3 and it's gone. X squared minus 16 equals 0. Can I factor further? There's 2 terms, difference of 2 squares, 2 sets of parentheses, plus and minus, square root of each, x and x, 4 and 4. set each factor equal to 0, x plus 4 equals 0, x minus 4 equals 0, solve each. X equals negative 4, x equals positive 4. You also could have done this using isolate square root method, but I'm not going to worry about that now. All right, let's take a look at we're not going to do, there's so many different things that can come up here. Let's just do two more. Let's do something like number 10. First, you're going to have to get everything in standard form. So the first thing I would do in number 10, I would distribute x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 3x minus 8. Now everything's combined. Mr. X squared, he wants to party. All of his friends have to come over. Minus 3x plus 8. Those 8's cancel as well. X squared minus x equals 0. Party time. Bubbles. Factoring. Is there a GCF? Yes. X minus 1 equals 0. Set each factor equal to 0. X equals 0. X minus 1 equals 0. X equals 0. X equals 1. Then we're just going to do one more example. Let's take a look at number 14. Mr. X to the third. Same thing as Mr. X squared. He wants to party. Before he can party, all of his friends have to come over. I can't combine anything, so I'm going to write it as x cubed minus 7x squared minus x plus 7 equals 0. Party time. Bubbles. Factoring. Is there a GCF? No. There are 4 terms. 4 terms is grouping. So I group the first 2 and the last 2. I find the GCF of each group. If there is no GCF, it's a 1. And since there's a minus in front of the group, I pull out a negative with it. I have x squared, x minus 7, minus 1, x minus 7 equals 0. That's step 1 of grouping. Step 2 is to combine my coefficients. X squared minus 1, x minus 7 equals 0. Can I factor further? Yes, I see difference of 2 squares. 2 sets of parentheses, square root of each. Square root of x squared is x, square root of 1 is 1. The x minus 7 comes down. Now I set each factor equal to 0. I set x plus 1 equal to 0. I set x minus 1 equal to 0. I set x minus 7 equal to 0. Minus 1 minus 1. X equals negative 1. Plus 1 plus 1. X equals positive 1. Plus 7 plus 7. X equals positive 7. And that's it. So to solve a polynomial equation, bring everything to one side, factor, set each factor equal to 0, and within that factoring step, it could be GCF, dots, trinomial, tricky trinomial, grouping. You may need to factor further. You need to know how to factor before you can do this lesson. And again, just following the Mr. X squared story is helpful in remembering what to do. Whenever you see Mr. X squared, he wants to party. Before he can party, all of his friends have to come over. That's bringing everything to one side. Then he parties with bubbles. Bubbles are parentheses. Parentheses you're always going to see when you're factoring. So, practice, practice, practice. Very, 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 very important lesson. It needs to be mastered because a lot of things are going to build on this. Practice and then practice. See ya.